Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for OUA football. Me and Tom are back on the mics following a hectic championship weekend across all of U Sports. We're going to do our players of the week, full U Sport edition. We're going to look at all the championship games, ending with our 116th Yates Cup that we were live and direct from doing the game day live. We'll talk to you about all those things and more. But first, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
I'm doing so well, my man. What an incredible weekend of football. Many of the Canadian fans that are out there said that this was the best weekend for Canadian football, with not only the four conference championships in U Sports, the Canadian Bowl in the CJFL, and then the two Eastern and Western conference finals for the CFL. Unfortunately, all happening on the same day, so you had to pick which one you wanted to watch live. But still, what an unbelievable showcase of our entire nation's football from the U Sports, CJFL, and CFL level.
It was an awesome day. It was a beautiful weather day, and it just made for such spectacular events. Your national semifinalists, in case you haven't been following along, obviously we'll get there. Your UTEC Bowl are the Laurier Golden Hawks versus the Bishop Gators, the Laval Rouge et Or versus the Regina Rams. How we got those matchups, we're going to break them all down for you. First, actually, you know what, Tom, before we go players of the week, I'm going to start calling you TV Tom, because you had a little bit of U Sports football talk right before this, didn't you, my friend?
I did. I had the esteemed pleasure of joining Jim Mullins and Gord Randall on their show, Gridiron Nation, on TSN, that's going to be showcasing, I believe, on this coming Thursday, which, pulling up calendar for the folks who are listening to this, November 14th at a 2 p.m. Eastern
My
time,
guy.
which is the coolest damn thing in the world to start off me joining into what you created, my friend, in this podcast, and see such a passion that's grown from this, and now getting recognized by, we're on TSN. We're going to be a part of a show that's on TSN. We did a game day live. We started game day lives this year and just kind of did it off the cuff. And shout out once again to Billy Brown and Griffin Football for allowing us to do this. And now at the end of the OUA season, at least, we had the president and CEO for the OUA on our game day live. So it's just been such an incredible experience of being welcomed in and just embraced by the Canadian football community here. I couldn't have done it with anybody else other than you, my friend, and obviously starting off this outstanding podcast. So shout out to you. Shout out to everybody else who has been working with us. I am just grinning from ear to ear, which for the folks who watch is nothing new, but still, this has just been so outstanding.
Well, I can't wait to see it. I'm sure you did an outstanding job, as you have been just piloting our C2C content this whole season. And I'll give another shout out to our guys at Royal Media for making those game day lives happen. Shout out to you, Manny. Shout out to you, Alex, all the great content that they make. But let's dive into the action, starting with our players of the week. And they were such great performances this week that we have shout outs and our players of the week for each of the categories that we're going to. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Tom, you've been talking about this individual athlete for so long now in terms of the shout out we want to go to. It would only be right for you to give him his due credit on this one. Where are we going for the shout out?
For the shout out, we are traveling to the RSEQ in the Dunsmore Cup. And despite the fact that there is a RSEQ MVP on the field, that's not who we are shouting out. We are shouting out his main target on this day, Olivier Cool. 10 catches, 144 yards, and one touchdown, including one of those catches where he did his best Julian Edelman impression, trying to catch the ball, pop it up right in front of him, and then corralling it once again for an outstanding grab. This was a defensive showcase that the Dunsmore Cup always is, but he shone across all of the outstanding players that were present.
And to Mr. Cool, the only piece of advice I'm going to give you is that catch was so close to being at the 55, brother. Come on. What's this first and 10 from the 54? Come on. Get us that extra yard, man. We're all about the brand, but we're going back to the Yates Cup for our player of the week. And Tom, you picked him right. You picked the Golden Hawks on this day. You give the shout out to our guy.
It's got to be number 13, Taylor Elgersma, 18 for 30, 306 yards, 4 touchdowns. This was an outstanding showcase, even with the one interception that he had here. I don't, I really can't remember a time where we're seeing a quarterback play at such a high level here. The only person that comes to mind to me to be comparable, and no disrespect to anybody else, of course, the Trey Fords of the world, the Chris Merchants of the world, they were unbelievable in their own rights. But being the Mac man myself, it's Kyle Quinlan in this one. And just before we hop off into everything else, I just wanted to pull up a stat here that I was able to dig into just a little bit. This is the regular season, but just to give folks a reference point. In the 2012 season, Kyle won the Heck Crichton. In the regular season, he went 162 completions for 235 attempts, which is 68% completion percentage, 2,457 yards passing, 19 touchdowns, and the real kicker, only 2 interceptions, which outstanding work, certainly. Then you look over at Taylor, what he did in the regular season. 178 for 239. That's 74% completion. 2,643 yards passing, 20 touchdowns, albeit with 9 interceptions here. But even in the efficiency rating that USports puts out, Taylor Elgersma, 187.5, Kyle Quinlan, 181.7. If we're thinking about the very best quarterbacks to ever play the game, certainly for me at least, Kyle Quinlan is up there. If he's not number one, he's number two. And I think 13 is putting a very strong case for why he should be in that conversation as well.
And sorry if you mentioned this already, Tom, that wasn't just a Yates Cup Kyle Quinlan was winning that year, correct?
We lost in the Vanier in 2012 in that
But
year.
individually. Was that a heck year for him?
That was the Heck Crichton year, yes.
Okay. And we already talked about the hit that Elgersma's guy in number 4, Give Me More, Ethan Jordan, is showing numbers that parallel to what another Heck Crichton winner and Kevin Mattal is doing. So again, that team in general, and again, we'll talk about this as some offseason content, pairing up with the 2011 MAC team that you were a part of, add into the mix like the 2017 Mustangs. Let's put this out into the universe. Top 5, top 3 really OUA teams of the last, we are having this conversation, Tom. We contextualize it in terms of our time being part of USports as players and as followers and coaches in your case and commentators in the league. So starting around 2011, they have to be in that conversation as top 3 with those other clubs. That's some off-season content that is just waiting to pop off, especially if this team can complete their mission of going 2 more weeks and picking up 2 more key wins. But let's talk about some of these other teams, because for Defensive Player of the Week and Defensive Shout-Out, let's pivot. Tom, our shout-out, where are we going with this one?
So for our shout-out for Defensive Player of the Week, we are traveling to the AUS. Technically, we're going to Quebec in this one. We are traveling to Lennoxville for the Bishop Gators, and our shout out of the week. If you were watching this game, you saw the insanity that was happening in the final moments here and in the dying seconds when St. Mary's has the ball with 40 seconds left in the fourth quarter. And we're thinking they've got this. They're going to kneel this out. They hand the ball off, and Gabriel Royer punches the ball out to give Bishops the ball back with 40 seconds left to kick a game-tying field goal that ultimately led to a triple overtime victory. Gabriel Royer, you get our shout-out of the week for what an incredible performance in the dying seconds to save their season.
Tom, I wish we were recording ourselves sitting in your truck watching the end of that game, because that was absolute bedlam. And I don't know if you picked up the name of the commentator out of Bishops. I'm assuming he's affiliated with Bishops, shaking the head no there. You texted me this earlier, having gone back to watch the whole thing. I'm right there with you. I am never missing another home broadcast of a Bishops Gators game as long as this young man is calling them. He's as electric as the players on the field. I apologize that we didn't find out your name, but shout out to you. Hey, 10-0 now for that Bishops team. And you know what? This kid's undefeated in my books as well. But that's the shout out. And if I may, for the defensive player of the week award. We're staying in Quebec, but we're properly pivoting into the RSEQ for the Coupe Dunsmore. And as we expected, as we know from year in, year out, it's going to be a defensive matchup. And boy, did that come through on this day. Obviously, you talked about Olivier Coul did for Laval, but on the defensive side of the ball for the Rouge et Or, one Loic Brodeur, numero 51, with 2.5 sacks and a forced fumble coming on one of those sacks late in the game. Montreal deep in their end just punches the ball out of Senecal's hands, and I can't recall if it led to a major or maybe a field goal, but it was really just, I think it was Montreal with an attempt to drive to tie up the game. It put it a little bit out of reach in that one. Great game overall. We'll obviously get to that one in more detail. Tom, special teams, where are we going with our shout out?
So shout out, typically, anytime we've seen a special teams player of the week or a shout out, we're going to a returner, we're going to a kicker. This time we're switching things up here because somebody who's not typically known for being on special teams had one hell of a game. Our shout out of the week goes to one Laomi Ojatalayo, who actually led all defensive tackles on the Laurier Golden Hawks with 5.5, all of them coming on special teams. Oftentimes those Western returners, whether it was Roman Campanaro, whether it was Daniel Cambalgo, it seemed like they had 3 steps before Laomi came down like a bat out of hell and tackled them on the ground, and they came up flexing and was hyped up as he rightfully should be. This kid, when you talk about everybody else on that Laurier squad and all the talent and everything, the number one thing that people say when you ask, oh, who do you think is going to be the best at transitioning to the CFL? All of them say Laomi, because not only does he have the offensive capabilities as a phenomenal receiver and the speed, but he's a stalwart person on their special teams, going down and running on kickoffs as hard as he can, being a blocker in the other cases. So Laomi Ojatalayo gets our special teams player of the week shout out.
Most certainly, and well deserved. And frankly, if it weren't for the triple OT affair going down in Lennoxville, he may have very well come away with the player of the week for specials. But for player of the week, we're going to one Xavier Gervais out of Bishops. Let's break it down like this. Bishops scoring, they scored in every single quarter. The first, it's a field goal by Gervais and nothing else. The second quarter, it's a field goal by Gervais and nothing else. They get their only major of the day in the third. Of course, he's capping it with the extra point. He gets the field goal to tie it up after that forced fumble that you were talking about in the fourth quarter. He's perfect in all 3 overtimes. And you know what? If it bounced a separate way, it could have been Adam Johnson for St. Mary's picking it up, because he goes 5 for 6 in the one extra point. But when you go 6 for 6 and 1 extra point, that's the Brian Garrity line that won him the player of the game from last year's Yates Cup. So Xavier Gervais, absolute ice in his veins, putting that game to bed. Tom, any comments on that one? Obviously, we'll go into the game in detail shortly and what a wild finish it was. But anything on that?
When you had 2 of these teams in Bishops and St. Mary's that were known for outstanding defenses, and they certainly came to play in this one, both offenses really not being able to do a whole lot, it came down to the kickers, and Xavier Gervais, at no point in time was he ever rattled. Did he ever think the lights were too bright? The situation was too tense, even though on his leg at 4 separate occasions to kick into the overtime and then 3 more while you're in overtime, he held their championship hopes and their season within his right leg. He kicked it straight and true every time. It's the ice in his veins for Mr. Gervais was outstanding to see.
Those are your players of the week, along with the shout outs for offense, defense, and special teams. But Tom, there were so many other great performances that made this championship weekend what it was. How about we dive into those now? We're going to start out with the Dunsmore Cup, the Coupe Dunsmore, that sees the Laval Rouge et Or come out victorious over the Montreal Carabin. This one, final score, Laval 22, Montreal 17. Hey, this one did not hold back in terms of what we were looking for, what we expect out of these 2 clubs. The third iteration of this matchup that had seen each one win 1 time apiece by a difference of 1-0. Tom, what are your major takeaways on this game?
When you look at the RSEQ, there's a reason why typically anybody whichever team comes out of the RSEQ, which in recent memory has been either been Montreal or Laval, they are a Vanier Cup hopeful, or if not the favorite to win the national championship because of the defense that is required to play and to get out of the Dunsmore Cup. When you see somebody like a Jonathan Senecal, who was the Heck Crichton winner just last year, and he goes 21 for 38, 233 yards and 2 touchdowns in the air, you're thinking, okay, that's pretty decent numbers. In RSEQ standards and in Jonathan Senecal standards, that's held to a pretty reasonable number here. The Laval defense came through in multiple times, getting through to Mr. Senecal, I believe 4 separate times for sacks and really pressuring him. And the way that they're doing this, and you can see it even in the CFL and the NFL, the way that things are, is it's not just one person who's coming off the edge. It's an entire collapse of the pocket. Jonathan Senecal and his ability to run is second to none, but when you collapse the entire pocket and you take everything away, his only option is to try to step back, and that's where those defensive ends can come out and they can make plays like our defensive player of the game, or of the week, in Loic Brodeur. And that's a lot of the sacks and how he was able to get them.
Dude, I love that you brought that up, because you could just see he looked like a trapped animal, where the way that those ends with Brodeur on the one side, I'm not sure the other defensive end, whether it was Quenville, the way they just took away any outside rush, and then Laval creating the pressure up in the middle. It was outstanding to be able to see. And the thing too that I think sometimes is underrated, like we talk about this on the offensive side of the ball, where you never want to create levels, whether that's a function of maybe one guy cut blocking in a pass protection or someone jump setting, and if the other guy is doing a more vertical set and creating space on a very more speed rusher. Sometimes you have to do those things as a product of who you're going up against. But when you create that depth amongst your O-line, that creates problems because it creates opportunities for D linemen to snake their way through. The exact same thing can be the case with a defensive rush if you're facing a quarterback, just like Senecal is, where if you have a speed rusher come hard up the edge and the tackle washes him, well, that might be a really tasty looking B gap for the quarterback to sneak out of, when it's that just slowly but surely collapsing pocket. And not even to say that Laval's O-line did a bad job. It was just like Senecal was playing in quicksand, where after a while, if he wasn't getting that ball out, my goodness, it was going to be curtains for him. You talked about the day that Olivier Cool had. I want to bring it back to him and then talk about Arnaud Desjardins. Because again, it was, what's so spectacular about watching teams like this with how good the defenses are is that when you see what looks like maybe a bust, it stands out like a sore thumb. And the Olivier Cool touchdown came on what looked like a pretty standard out and up. And I don't know if the corner was in a cut coverage and he was supposed to stay low, or if he bid on a player that was coming out to the flats and thought that, okay, Cool's running this out. I kind of know he's somewhere behind me, not that deep. I can now crash down on this leaking fullback. But then Cool just wraps it up the sideline. And Desjardins, the ease at which he just flicks that ball up to his guy was absolutely miraculous, because just like we said, Laval, Montreal is bringing that heat. And whether it's actually a blitz, that pocket slowly but surely, even with some great O-line, is closing in on him. It stood out so much because it just looked like, wow, that doesn't happen to a Montreal defense to find him. But when you have an athlete like Cool, and when you have a guy like Desjardins who can pump to that out, and then with like nothing on it through his legs, just through the upper body, get that ball up there, that was a special play.
Well, it showcases once again why defense is so important for both of these squads to get out of the RCQ, because the moment that there is one mistake, obviously a blown coverage, if you have a solid quarterback, that's always going to be taken advantage of. But if there's one area that you're able to get through, if there's a gap on that defensive line to run through, if there's a guy who becomes open because there's a zone coverage, or there's just a coverage mistake that happens, it's going to get capitalized on, especially with these two teams, because not only do they have outstanding players, but the coaching staffs for both of these squads are unbelievable. Glenn Constantine for the Laval Rouge et Or is the winningest coach in USports history, and he's still going. the domination that Laval has had, albeit a little bit lesser now that Montreal has really established themselves ever since I'd say like 2014, 2013 area, and constantly going back and forth in this. But the domination that Laval had in the early 2000s and even currently to now just speaks to how well these teams are coached. Obviously, Marco DeLuca with the Montreal Canadiens, he's what he brings to that team is unmatched as well. But when you see these players and when you see how they perform, and the idea is that they're just always so prepared for something like this. Even earlier in the game, I believe it was Brendan Gurjon or Simon Rappel. I believe it was Simon who was completely wide open for the Montreal Canadiens. And once again, Jonathan Senecal found him, and he was able to just walk into the end zone for, I believe it was like a 39-yard touchdown pass just there. So it's the same. There's very similar aspects for both of these squads here, and what am I trying to say? It's no surprise that these teams are so good and they are so incredible because of the coaching staffs and because of the players that are out there as well. But Olivier Cool, with how well his connection is with Arnaud Desjardins, it's just outstanding to see the two of them connect and just be on the same page, seemingly at any point in time.
Totally. And I think we talk obviously a lot about how Can West football looks like pro style football. And maybe and no doubt, like I'm going to say it's the same thing for RCQ. And it's in large part because it literally looks like you're watching a pro game with the crowd involvement, the noise, the pageantry of it all. But it is a play, and I think and Senecal had so many of his great moments as well. But I think it was Desjardins too cool, a play where it's just him running out of the slot in the seam, whether it was a cover two or cover three, and right between those two deep players. And he just puts that ball on a dime, lets Cool go up for it as the safeties collapse on him, or the safety in the corner, whoever it is. And it's just like that's a pro style play. Read the coverage, knew he had the look, put the ball there, no question about it. I loved what we were seeing out of him all game long. We talk about how well Laval was doing getting after Senecal. Obviously, though, Montreal was, note for note with them, aside from, again, highlighting that one specific play where they get 4 sacks on the day. And obviously our guy, Jeremiah Ojo, getting 2 amongst them. The interception by Crame. Great job by this defense. How do you contextualize a day like this where you say, look, Desjardins, he ends up, 27 for 37, 259, a touchdown, an interception. They get a little bit going on the ground. Mathieu Roy was 72 as well. On the whole, like where do you sort of lean in terms of the end? Was this a product of, hey, an extra bounce here, that fumble, that big explosive play for Laval was just explosive enough to be able to make the difference in it? Because I still look at this and say, if Montreal defensively, it's hard to really say that they didn't do their job. Is it just a couple extra bounces that went Laval's way in this game?
I think it really comes down to the Laval defense and what they were able to do here, because when you look at the production that Laval was able to have on offense, it's certainly not blowing anybody away, but 360 yards of total offense, 259 in the air and 116 on the ground. And then you look over at Montreal's offense and it's 247, 233 of which are passing. 61 rushing yards. And realistically, when you actually go in and you break down the stats in here once again, Jonathan Senecal is their leading rusher with 4 attempts for 38 yards. Oftentimes, if not all of them, it's him escaping from the pocket and making something work with his legs, not a designed run. If you really look at this, only 6 times did they actually call a run play to either Glody Musin, Carl Chabat, or Redval Kitsa. My apologies if I butchered the pronunciation on those once again, my friends. But the aspect is that they're not even going to try to run the ball. Obviously, when you have somebody that is so dynamic in Jonathan Senecal, you want to get him the ball as often as humanly possible, because regardless of the plays that you're scheming up, if he sees something with his legs, he can make something happen. And then suddenly scramble rules happen. And when you have the outstanding receivers that he has to throw to, that's just special things can happen there. But to be one-dimensional in that regard obviously did wonders for them as of last year, winning the Vanier Cup, Jonathan Senecal being the Crichton winner. But eventually some team was going to be able to pick up on that, and who better than the Laval Rouge et Or? I think taking away any ability to run the ball, forcing the ball into Jonathan Senecal's hands, and not even forcing him to make mistakes, but just limiting how well he's able to move the ball, getting out to his star receivers. That's really, for me, what took Laval over the edge in this game, because both of them have fantastic defensive plays here, and both of them had solid quarterback plays with fantastic receivers. But the big difference to me is the lack of the run game that we saw from Montreal here. Not being able to hold the ball or establish anything on the run means that you're constantly having to throw, you're constantly stopping the clock, and just not owning the time of possession.
Yeah. And you know what? Even with the success in the passing game to the extent they did, you still look at some of the numbers and a guy like Carl Chabot, who's, obviously now become very familiar with a lot of USport fans in all the conferences, now seeing Montreal having ascended to so many of these conference championships and in the Vanier Cup last year, where the 6 catches, but limiting only to 50 yards. So even when they're having those successes in the pass game, Laval's not letting those yak yards really pile up. And when you know that they're going to have to pass because you're limiting that rush, you're allowing those guys to key in on those things a little bit more. Tom, what other notes do you have from this matchup?
When you watch this Laval team and you watch how well they're able to move and communicate, there's very few times that they actually make mistakes. And they're obviously coaching and they're playing at a very high level in this game. There's a reason why these teams are always favored when they're coming out of the RCQ, because of what's required of them to go there. With Laval, and I can say it from experience as well, they're never going to be a team that gets afraid or overwhelmed with the lights or the pressure or anything else. Oftentimes, they're playing in front of larger crowds at their home games than in national championship games, especially if it's not hosted in their home city of Quebec City. So the fans aren't going to get to them. The travel doesn't really get to them because they travel out west and consistently win when they go out west. This is a Laval team that has to be the favored to come in, at least to make it to the Vanier Cup. Certainly going up against anybody who would have come out of the Can West, but going into Regina, I'd say even more so now. So it's going to be a very tall task for the Regina Rams to try to get this win, but I'm getting too far ahead of myself. We still got some games to cover, but my goodness, does Laval look good.
And we'll certainly get to how Regina came out of Can West, but that's also setting up to be another defensive matchup like this is, man, just, you know what? Like, it's so great having these beautiful days where sometimes Nate used to always talk about that, like great laundry matchups. And just anytime you get to see the red and the blue of that matchup, I love the face masks with that chrome red for Laval as well. If that doesn't just ooze intimidation on top of the fact, it's the same way that for so long, and it's still the case that we'll talk about Western in a few beats here. You see that purple march onto the field, and it just says, okay, they're already up a couple scores. Might be a different purple now getting that swing of things in the OUA. But hey, great job by both these clubs. There's a reason they flip-flop year in and year out in terms of who's going to represent their conference at the next level. And let's proceed to be able to get to the team that made their way there. But we're going to make a stop out east, or I guess we're staying within the province of Quebec. We're making a trip from Quebec City to Lennoxville, where the Bishops Gators, in 3 overtime sessions, pulled out the victory against the St. Mary's Huskies. Final score in this one, Bishops 25, St. Mary's 22. Tom, this game really came to life, I should say, in the fourth quarter. I don't see how we start anywhere else but in that last quarter.
Well, first and foremost, of course, going into this, and even in halftime, the game is 6-3. There's only field goals. It's a very defensive focused game, but an insane stat, and I don't think I'd have to do obviously a lot of research into comparing this. I don't think it's ever been done in a conference championship game. In this Loney Bowl, between fumbles, interceptions, and turnovers on down, 12 different changes of possession. 12. Unbelievable. And sorry, I shouldn't say changes of possession, should be actual turnovers. 12 turnovers. Whether you're getting stuffed on third down, whether you are fumbling the ball, or whether you are getting intercepted, that's just an insane stat to me and really showcases how well both of these defenses were playing. Justin Curion is the AUS MVP, and what he was doing in the regular season certainly shows what he should be. In this game, 23 for 37, 187 yards is it's okay, but it's certainly not what we're used to seeing from him typically. No touchdowns, no interceptions either, but just seeing how many different Bishops and St. Mary's Huskies were fumbling the ball in this game. Fumbles for Bishops, Justin Curion with one, Marco Brion with two, and Griffiths with another one, totaling four fumbles and four lost by the Bishop Gators in this one. Defensive struggle is an understatement when it comes to these teams.
And that's two things. That's ultimately how you get a recipe for a game that is as low scoring and that it has a battle of great kickers in this one. And at the end of the day, despite those four fumbles, it's the Malik Williams one that really was, it's the last one we see. It's the one that leaves the sour taste in the mouth for all St. Mary's fans. Tom, I realize let's pause on the game itself for a second because you brought to my attention beforehand something that one of our favorite people in all of USport fandom and just of all sorts of whatever, Ken Waller brought to your attention about the namesake of the Loney Bowl having a bit of a back and forth history, so to speak. I think that's a story worth sharing, no?
I would say so. So the actual, unlike all of the other conference championships, while it's called the Loney Bowl, the championship, the actual trophy that they fight for is the Jewett Trophy. Dan Loney was credited as being the father of maritime football. Back in the 1950s and 60s, he had just come out of an outstanding career, both playing in professional football and even playing when he was with the Canadian Navy. And after he was done, he came to the Maritimes and was the head coach at St. FX and had a dominant performance there, but all the while continuing to set up camps and do coaches clinics because they're not what we call coaches clinics, but you understand what I'm saying, but really trying to just explore how can the Maritimes be a part of the football conversation in Canada, and he even helping to establish what turned into the semifinal games for the actual Loney Bowl championship. So Dan Loney was inducted into the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame in 1988, and that's where the Loney Bowl gets its name from. So shout out to you, Ken Waller. First off, always shout out to you for all of the listening and all of the support that you give us, but for the outstanding question as well.
An outstanding piece of Canadian football history that needs to be, memorialized in the annals. Yes.
Sorry, one last thing. The unbelievable career that Dan Loney had. He was an offensive lineman, baby.
It always comes back to the O-line because, Tom, if we don't talk about them,
nobody else will.
You're darn tootin'. Tom, another major factor on why obviously a game like this is going to end up a little more low scoring is when you look at it. You talked about what Curion did on the day, and it obviously doesn't stand up to what he had been doing all year long. Alan Young, a day, that's, hey, watch the film, get better from it, move on. 11 for 29, 101, the three interceptions. He ended up punching in the only touchdown for St. Mary's on the ground himself. But a day, speaking of the ground game, that was very much controlled by these Bishops Gators on the ground in David Chaloux with 20 attempts for 160 yards and a touchdown on the long of 57. And you mentioned Marco Brony, 18 attempts for 88. So a combined 38 ground attempts by their top two guys. And for what it's worth, before even talking about that in detail, as we obviously get more familiarity with these clubs outside of the OUA, and again, in large part, shout out to that just electric commentator for the Bishops Gators in bringing it to our attention. Marco Brioni actually hails from Mexico, which is a very neat jump in terms of thinking about the international football piece, maybe in the same way we see the Americans coming in often to get the national ranking, so to speak, for the purposes of CFL. Don't know too much about young Marco here running the ball for Bishops, but the more and more we see international players with that rule in the CFL, certainly hard to not look past that. But the rushing game for this Bishops Gators team, and a team that's obviously really hung their hat on this defense and on this great performance of their quarterback in Quirion, this rushing attack came to play today.
Yeah, it became very clear early on that neither team was really going to be able to establish what they typically do in the air in this game. Both defensive secondaries really doing their thing. So They both turned to the ground game, and Bishop's obviously very clearly had a better time in that attempt. The Bishop's O-line did a very good job of corralling, for the most part, the St. Mary's defense and certainly the front seven, establishing just a few gaps here or there that Chalot and Brion were able to really find and hit, which led to the outstanding days that they had, like you beautifully detailed here. But really, when you look at the most important aspect of this, it's the time of possession,
Hmm.
holding the ball and being able to establish. Yes, you have only a 3 point lead at a certain points here in the 6-3 affair, but holding on to the football, establishing the run, keeping it on the ground, especially in two down football, is just so incredible to be able to do. And that's exactly what Bishops was able to get to in this game. Shalou averaging 8 yards per carry is an outstanding feat, albeit he does have a long of 57, sure, but 160 on the ground with 8 yards on an average is a hell of a stat and a huge reason why they were able to move the ball. Even you can see it in the overtime setting. Each team starts at the 35 and works their way in. St. Mary's could barely get first downs, whereas Bishops is constantly driving in. Now, St. Mary's defense really played outstanding, and they were able to hold them, obviously, to no touchdowns during the overtime session, but they're still driving on them and wearing them out and wearing them down constantly here. And that's a huge testament to that offensive line that Bishops had, and obviously the two running back system that they had here as well.
No doubt. And honestly, huge shout out to the St. Mary's offensive line because going against the team in Bishops, we talked about even them just scoring the 22 points on the day. That's exceeding the average that Bishop's been holding teams to. Granted, you get the overtime sessions for a couple extra field goals, but a team that I don't have the number in front of me racked up in the high 20s, something like that in sacks on the season for Bishops. They get one sack on this day, coming as a combined 2 half sacks on the day. Great job by that St. Mary's offensive line. And it was really honestly, as far as from our vantage point, my vantage point, I should say, in that last overtime session where they get to push back Malik Williams a little bit and they really broke through. And then Alan Young isn't able to connect with this guy and Joshua Jack, leading to the missed field goal by Johnston from 44 to then set up the game winner for Gervais. Now, Tom, I'm curious because you went back to watch the whole thing again. Because when we were watching it together, it's like 35 seconds to go in the fourth quarter. And St. Mary's has the ball. They're inside their own 10, but they're up by 3 points in the game. And they run a play. And number one, I don't want to put any of this on Malik Williams. We're obviously way more in favor of celebrating the positives, and so I'll give all the shout out in the world to the Bishops Gators, as you already did. Sorry, remind me of the young man's name who punched it out.
Gabriel Royer.
Gabriel Royer. Beautiful job by you on the pronunciation as well, Tom. I want to give the credit to him for making the outstanding play because man, that's a bad beat, but. Mm-hmm. And we get this wrong sometimes. We go over like the rule score situation, and sometimes if we think, oh, shouldn't that have been a penalty or this, that, and the third, we were pretty mystified to think, can you not take a knee? And then worst case scenario, do the classic, have your running back, whomever, run around the end zone, eat up some time, give up a safety with maybe less than 10 seconds on the clock, and you're pushing Bishops back into their end where you can't even say like the prospect of them getting into field goal range at that point with what probably would have been like no time left is seemingly an untenable situation. So you're saying, okay, they need a Hail Mary to be able to just score any points, let alone the requisite at that point, 2 points. It would be, again, if you give up a safety, you push it back to their end and then say, okay, there's like 5 seconds to go. What do you want to do? We're like going back to watch it. Have you made any more sense just on what the decision might have been? At a certain point, maybe you just say, hey, like, we trust our guy. Like, you don't anticipate something like that to happen. But obviously, you know that can happen.
went back and I tried to watch this. I can't make heads or tails of why they chose to run the ball. The only thing that I can think of is that Bishops had both of their timeouts left, and it didn't make sense if they just ran it twice or they nailed twice. They'd only burn like 2 seconds or something, and then immediately call timeout and they give them the ball back. So they decide to run plays, and like you said, even if you wanted to try and say, "Oh well, Malik Kote or Malik Williams, he should have had whatever," when you watch that actual play, Malik Williams has the ball and it's completely covered. Royer comes out, grabs him by the back of the shoulder, and punches the ball as cleanly as I've ever seen it be punched out. And unless you have duct tape around that ball and you're holding it there, there's no way that that ball's not coming out with the way that he was able to get there. So it is not Malik Williams whatsoever. It was 100% Royer and what he was able to do with that to get them there. But such a heartbreaking loss from that standpoint. Even when you and I were listening to it, those very passionate and very clear Bishop Gators fans, I thought they were on the verge of tears at a certain point here when they were talking about it. And then to see the fumble happen and to see them tie it up and go into overtime, it just kind of felt like certainly the momentum in that standpoint. But once Bishops got into that overtime setting with how well they had been able to move the ball previously, this was ultimately what was going to be. And certainly in that it's a third overtime after having a full game, every team is exhausted. But the very last drive for St. Mary's, they actually lose yardage to make it that 44-yard missed field goal, which was just such a heartbreaker for the St. Mary's Huskies, who were on the absolute cusp of it. But even when you look at how they were able to score that touchdown, it was a tip drill. Alan Young really did not have a great game in this one, struggled to find his receivers at times, but it was tipped off of a Bishop's Gator defender and then caught and got them right down to the 1 yard line where Young was able to punch it in. So it wasn't exactly like an offensive showcase to get them in for their lone touchdown on the day. So Bishop certainly played outstanding, but St. Mary's and specifically that defense really did some outstanding things. Justin Curion, like we mentioned, has been able to really take over games in every of the other AUS games, and he was not able to in this time because of the outstanding defensive play that we saw.
Most definitely. And you know what? I'll finish off, and you were talking about this on the preview pod on the Game Day Live yesterday. We're really starting to see it in large part with how well Bishops is playing, this resurgence of AUS football, because we know what St. FX can do, not just in winning the Loney Bowl and winning out east. We've seen them put up good performances in a couple of those national semifinal games. I think back to, again, 2022, I think it was against Saskatchewan, and them nearly picking up that win. St. Mary's showed that they were legit. And hey, Bishops gets to now host that UTEC Bowl with Laurier coming into their house. And you know what? Obviously, we want to see our OUA team make it to the Vanier Cup. But I'll say, at least selfishly, oh no, it won't be our friend calling it, because it'll be a CBC broadcast most likely. Darn, get our guy on the broadcast. Let's go. I don't know your name yet, man, but hopefully you're tuning into our show, because you got to learn about some of the OUA content out there. So my apologies, our apologies. Great job by you. You have our dedicated tuning in for next season for Bishops Gators football. Tom, any last words on this fascinating Loney Bowl?
Yes, exactly like you were mentioning. I'm excited to see the growth of the AUS and showcasing how, if they're ever going to be able to get back into that national championship contention, defense is going to be an outstanding, or it's going to be a stalwart part of that. Playing great defense is what all of these teams share in common and is what really helps lead them there. I don't know how well that offense is going to be able to play against some of the top tier teams in the OUA, especially against a Laurier squad that just had a pretty damn good defensive showing. Even if you look at the scoreboard and you say, Tom, what are you talking about? The Western put up 31 points. If you actually watched that game, you saw a defensive domination by the Laurier Golden Hawks, which we'll obviously get into in a little bit here. But I'm happy to see the growth of the game. I think that the teams are getting better and better. And certainly, we're not seeing the blowouts that we saw a number of years ago with the Western Mustangs and with the Laval Rouge et Or and things of that nature. So I'm hoping to see a similar trend and hoping to see at one point in time the AUS get back to form and get back into those national championship games. It's just going to be a tall task, especially what's coming for them.
I'm wishing the same thing, but only if it's a year where they're not playing an OUA team.
Uh-huh.
Nonetheless, let's move on to our Can West matchup, our Hardy Cup, where it saw the fourth place Regina Rams take out, albeit the third place Saskatchewan Huskies, but Saskatchewan Huskies club that has been in these major games for a few years going right now. Regina 19, Saskatchewan 14. Again, a team in Regina that lived up to, on the defensive side, what they've been showing all year long. Obviously, again, with these non-OUA conferences, you get the matchups that had happened before. So much like with the Dunsmore Cup being a matchup with the teams both winning one of their previous two matchups apiece. Same situation here where Regina and Sask split the two games they played in this game. But you highlighted with that Loney Bowl the number of turnovers caused by this one. You made some really cool statements about the Saskatchewan defense that I'll set you up for here. This game was no different from the standpoint of not always turning into turnovers, but pardon me, for Regina, 4 interceptions. And we'll talk about how many of those we think were products of that defense, which was really solid, and sometimes where it was maybe Ammonrund maybe not making the best read or a ball that went off a guy's hand. But on the Saskatchewan side of things, forcing 5 fumbles, recovering 2 of them, Regina forcing 2 fumbles themselves. But my goodness, to force 5 fumbles on an opposing team, I don't often cuss in any capacity, so allow me just to keep it relatively mellow, is badass. Holy jumping Tom. They might have, lost the war, but many of those battles Saskatchewan was winning on this game.
I don't think I've seen a defense hit harder from top to bottom than that Saskatchewan Huskies defense when they played against Regina. Specifically, 2 guys that I want to shout out, Lane Novak and Seth Hundeby for the Saskatchewan Huskies were coming downhill and caused some havoc every time they were able to hit those receivers. Like you mentioned, 5 forced fumbles, albeit only 2 of them recovered. Most of those, if not all of them, it's not because somebody was punching out the ball like our guy in Royer did. It was literally because of how hard they were hitting these Regina Rams. But credit to the Rams. No matter how hard or how bad a hit seemed to be, everybody popped right up right afterwards as if to say, yeah, that's just Can West football, baby. Got back to the huddle and we're continuing to do their thing. And obviously the Regina Rams were no slouches themselves. We detailed a lot of the different statistics throughout the entirety of, some of our recaps and everything else. The Regina Rams, in terms of points per game, are 7th in all of Canada. They're number 1 in Can West. So despite their 3-5 regular season record, it's no shock that all of the teams that they played against so far have struggled to really score points and move the ball against them. They're averaging only 22 points per game, 349 yards per game, 11 interceptions, albeit only 11 sacks, but they've got some stalwart players. I obviously mentioned a couple on the Saskatchewan side. The one person that I really wanted to call out for the Regina Rams is a guy that I actually had the chance to see live and in person at the East-West Bowl, but in one, number 11, Delaney Robinson. He's a cornerback for them, and you don't see outstanding numbers from him because people don't throw his way. We saw one of the hopefuls for an all-star going into this year, and one of the Concordia receivers, I believe, was Jaden Griffiths, if I remember correctly. My apologies if I got that wrong just off the cusp here. But he only finishes the East-West game with 1 catch, and that's because Delaney Robinson was on him all game long. I loved what I saw from this young man. He did the same thing here. He finishes with 2.5 sacks and a pass breakup, and really nobody wanted to throw his way, and they haven't wanted to throw his way all year because of what he's been able to do here. So just an outstanding defensive showcase by both of these teams.
And for Regina and for Mr. Robinson, they're certainly having his hands full with the likes of Daniel Weeb and Rhett Varva coming his way. And Weeb had a strong day and some really nice touchdowns, 60 yards in total on 8 receptions to go along with that. But let's break down the quarterback play on this day because on the one hand, Anton Amon-Run goes 29 for 43, 232 touchdowns, and the 4 interceptions. I want to talk about those more than anything. Noah Peltier on the other side, 23 for 33, 228, and 1 touchdown. Solid performance on the day there. Those 4 interceptions, again, as we set it up, there's a couple of them where it looks like great reads by Regina, right time, right place. One or two that might have been whether it was the ball was slightly off, but there's one that goes off a receiver's hand, then lines into the Regina defender's hands, and a few that just looked like bad reads altogether. And obviously, we already said it in talking about that Loney Bowl. We're not in the business of trying to talk down on a kid by any means whatsoever. But from the standpoint of, are you giving more credit to the Regina standpoint on those 4 turnovers, or are you maybe saying Amon-Run maybe made a misread here or there, or a receiver just not bringing it in? Where on that scale do you slide a little bit more?
I think if you're looking at this, it's just outstanding play from the Regina defense. The Sombach brothers, the twins, I believe, Jackson Sombach and Carson Sombach, with a couple of interceptions, and Carson, the one taking that back for the 45-yard pick six. When you look at how well this team was able to defend, I think it really showcases once again, when you're getting into these conference championships, you have no room to make those mistakes. And exactly like you were saying, Anton Emmenrud, we mentioned it on the pod, we mentioned it on the Game Day Live as well. He is first and foremost a gunslinger. He is not afraid to rip the ball down the field. He's only in his 3rd year, and he's been a starter for them since his 1st year. So lots of capabilities, and obviously following up a guy like Mason Nias is never easy to do, but he's had some real solid performances, obviously leading Saskatchewan into the Hardy Cup here. Unfortunately, with just some of the things that we saw with, one of our guys like Tristan Aboud, and that the balls are going to the right people, the people who seem to be open, but they're behind or they're just off target just a little bit. And that's causing things like a ball to get popped up and to get it intercepted in that regard. On the opposite side of things, Noah Peltier, like you mentioned, just a solid game overall. 228 in the air and a single touchdown with no interceptions just means that he was doing everything that was required to, just did just enough to help those Regina Rams get into a solid enough position here. But if you're the Saskatchewan Huskies defense, have to be a little bit frustrated with how well you were playing. And ultimately, yes, they did give up a touchdown, but they were playing just some fantastic football. And to have that pick six really, come in with about 5 minutes left to go in the 3rd quarter, be the nail in the coffin for this game it had to be something heartbreaking for this squad.
Most definitely. And, just talking about defense, it's hard not to, again, bring it back to what Regina did on the day. And for any other proof that you look at them holding Riker Frank to, hey, we love the shout out on the 55 yards, but a guy in Riker Frank, and you might know more on it than I do, whether would it be his draft year? And we know it's a major draft year because I believe he was with the team when they lose in 21 in the Vanier to Western, of course. Then in 22 they lose to Laval, and then last year they lose to remind me. They lose. Wait, hold on a second. They lose to UBC, I should say. And then this year, losing to Regina. And so a guy that's been part of such spectacular Huskies teams, been knocking on the door twice, and then to lose to an eventual Vanier Cup participant in UBC, and this one against a team in Regina that, not to take anything away from them, they were stellar. The defense came through as you've detailed so beautifully. But man, oh man, hoping this kid's got the type of goods to get him to that next level, so we can keep enjoying this type of play that he puts up year in year out at the highest levels. But both as a product to again shout out what Regina did and being able to slow him down, and also just to say, man, Frank, hey, salute to you, young sir.
Yeah, he is in his fourth year, so he is going into his draft year. But like you mentioned, with such a overwhelmingly populated draft year, there's a strong chance that we see him back with the Huskies going into next year, which would just be fantastic for all of the Saskatchewan Husky fans because of everything that he's able to do on the ground. But really, that's been the Achilles heel for the Saskatchewan Huskies team and the games that they've really struggled against. It's where Riker Frank just really isn't able to get things going on the ground. It's not like he needs to have a 200-yard day, even though he is very capable of doing that at a moment's notice, but he needs to be able to establish the run. And shout out to this defensive line for Regina. They played some fantastic football. And another big reason into why Anton Amnerud was throwing interceptions is because he had pressure in his face pretty well all game long. To see how well this team was able to corral around themselves. Because let's remember, folks, yes, they were the number 4 seed. They were 3-5 in the regular season. Everybody, including us, had them written off. Not that they weren't going to win the semifinal game, they weren't going to win the Hardy Cup, and they did both. So the grit that this team has really been phenomenal. The challenge that they've got in front of them is a mountain for sure, but enjoy this Hardy Cup win. This was an outstanding showcase by this Regina Rams squad. I really was just super impressed with how well that defense was able to get things done.
It just wasn't in the cards for teams with Huskies mascots in this weekend. Tom, I don't know if those are your final thoughts, but last notes on this installment of the Hardy Cup.
It was interesting to me to see a Hardy Cup game be so low scoring in a league where typically you're known for offense more than anything. Whereas the RSEQ is a defense focused league, the Can West is an offensive focused league. When you've got guys like an Anton Amnerud, Noah Peltier, Garrett Rooker, Jackson Tuchinski, and everybody else doing their thing out there, we're expecting high scoring affairs. But to see this, it does give me hope to see what Regina is going to be able to do against the Laval Rouge et Or. Obviously, they are no slouches to defensive battles here, but if Regina can find a way, if they can do something to limit that outstanding passing attack that they have, they may have a chance.
Well, we'll have to wait and see for next week, but we have one more game, the most important game in the most important league, not just the most important, the best league in all of USports football. That's the OUA, folks, as you so thoroughly know. We'll get to that game in 1 second because a little prior to the game starting, you and I, Tom, we're doing the Game Day Live, our fourth installment
Yep.
in this year of the Game Day Live, and perhaps one of our finest. You already mentioned the fact that we were graced with Gord Grace, President and CEO of the OUA, joining us. But then even having surprise guests and two-time Vanier Cup champion running back Trey Humes for the Western Mustangs, followed up immediately by former Griffin and current member of your Hamilton Ticats, Keandre Smith. It was an electric day. It was great seeing, there's the Ticats shirt popping out underneath the After 55 gear. It was an electric day. Obviously, the weather was picture perfect, not just for the game, but for our sakes. And as our guys with Royal Media had mentioned, it was a perfect day for the broadcasting equipment as well. What are your just initial notes from that standpoint, aside from the minor heart attack I gave you showing up 5 minutes before we went on air? I'm very sorry, Tom.
Oh God, I would be lying if I wasn't sweating bullets. I had Mr. Gord Grace talking to him, being like, "Yeah, we'd love to have you on the Game Day Live here to start things off and all this." And then I'm looking at my clock, and it's 10:50. We're supposed to be live at 11, and you're still not here. And oh my God, what am I gonna do? But obviously, you showed up in the nick of time here, and we're able to get set up and ready to go immediately. So kudos to you for showing up when you did. And I talked about it at the beginning of the pod here, but just looking at just having this appreciation for everything that you and I have gone through. And trying to cover this game as best as we can, trying to give the outstanding athletes and coaches the platform that they so righteously deserve with how much time, energy, and effort they put into their craft and how damn good they are at what they do. To see that recognition, to see the growth of this, and just be so welcomed by the OUA and U Sports football communities has been nothing short of amazing. And the Game Day Live is a huge aspect of that by not only the people who are listening, but the people who are watching us as they're coming into the stadium and seeing us kind of wrap up some of the stuff that we are doing, the interactions that we had. It was just fantastic. Albeit there was one strange one where somebody was asking me to open up a gate for them or something and thinking that I worked there and obviously not seeing the cameras that were directly in front of our face and gave me a snide comment at the end of it. But that's all a part of showbiz, baby.
Most certainly. And it was obviously our first time going through all those bumps and learning moments along the way, along with our friends with the Royal Media and what they were able to provide for us along the way, and all the additional content and the great interviews they've helped us capture. And you did some outstanding interviews after the game that I can't wait to be checking out myself. We'll obviously talk about this more and more into the offseason, but for those of you who tuned in, who checked out the content, whether it was actually live or after the fact, let us know your feedback for Game Day Lives. This isn't something that's going anywhere from our standpoint. What are the things you want to see? Did you like having the guests? Obviously, in this case, those were a little impromptu. Gord Grace, of course, being one you organized beforehand. Do you want to see more interviews? Do you want to see more of the C2C content on there? Do you like it when it's the field in the background? Do you like it with the fans? You let us know what you want, and we will deliver as we do our darndest to do every single time we hop on the mics in any form or fashion. But that's all window dressing because it's all about the game, the 116th Yates Cup, the rematch of the 115. And like the rematch in the regular season, it's a flipping of the switch from 2023 with Laurier picking up the win, not only in the regular season, but in the Yates Cup at home. Final score, the Laurier Golden Hawks 51, the Western Mustangs 31. Tom, there's so many places we can start with this, and I want to start by alluding to a bit of I took a few chirps on the day. Fair enough. Went into Waterloo having picked Western to come in and win the Yates Cup. Father of one Malik Cote, quoting myself from a podcast earlier in the season saying, oh, I thought you said you weren't going to doubt Laurie anymore. What was that all about? And you come in here and you pick Western. Allow me to say, by no means was my picking of Western a doubting of Laurier one way or the other. As I had mentioned, I thought defense was going to prevail on the day. We know that both of these teams are defensive stalwarts from the Laurier standpoint, as you already detailed. Despite the 31 points for Western, it was a defensive showcase for them. I thought it was going to be a lower scoring game. I thought it was going to be a beat 'em up affair. But this shouldn't be a moment in which we say that I was wrong in not just picking Western. The manner by which Laurier beat down on Western is, again, why we're now saying that we have to have a conversation about where Laurier and where Taylor Elgersma rank in terms of all-time teams. For them to be so close last year in both those matchups against Western in London on both of those, to come back this year, albeit they return so many of those players on offense, they lose some key players on defense, yet seemingly as a whole almost get better. And to be able to just do the thing, it's in 2015 when we ended up beating Western. That whole year was so pressured packed because we came off of losing to you the year before, and we just felt like we're running out of time for what we were really trying to do in that Stu Lang era of win a Yates Cup, and we managed to do it. But golly, was it a stressful affair. And I'm certain many of those years in which you were hoisting up that Yates Cup championship, you can speak to that similar thing of knowing that if it's not you, it's a short list, including you, who people are expecting to be able to do it. When you go into a year with those types of expectations, and for Laurier to not miss a beat on their journey to do it does not speak to saying, oh, you underestimated them or whatever. It's the LeBron James being as good as LeBron James was when everyone was saying to the world that this kid's the chosen one at the age of 16. The ability for them to call their shot, to go into this year with everything that happened last year and do so the manner they did is unflippin' believable.
To watch this game start off and to see Western in the opening drive go 6 plays, 97 yards, capped off by a 62-yard run by Keanu Yazbek, and it's 7-0 in 3 minutes, and you and I are looking at each other going, "Uh-oh, if this is what's going to happen all game, then Laurier might have something of a trouble." And then we come over and it's 4 plays and 71 yards. Taylor Elgersman fine Tayshaun Jackson. Okay, it's now 7-7. Okay. Uh Western gets the ball back, 2 and out. Laurier gets the ball, and Ryan Hughes filling in for Raiden Thorne, who was out, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, an OUA All-Star, probably going to be an All-Canadian. He's out. That's going to be a huge blow for the Laurier Golden Hawks. Ryan Hughes, the backup, the guy who doesn't normally start, comes in and leads the team in receptions and receiving yards with 7 catches, 113 yards at a touchdown. I got a chance to talk to Michael Falls before the game happened. Coach Michael Falls, put some respect on that name. He told me every once in a while when there's throw-arounds that are happening in the summertime here, there's not a quarterback that's able to make it out. So the coach gets back out. He dusts off that Heck Crichton winning arm, and he goes, you know what? I'll throw a couple to the boys here. And he rips them around. He told me he's can't remember a receiver that had a better catch radius than Ryan Hughes. Anything within his arm reach, he's coming down with it. Just as a quick aside, as I'm going through my point here. But anyways, the point that I was trying to make before I got into, oh my goodness, Ryan Hughes is so good, is that 4 straight drives to start the game, Laurier goes down and scores touchdowns, and suddenly, early on, well, somewhat early into the second quarter or second half, it's 28-7 for Laurier. And you and I are looking at each other like, well, this is the best offense that we've seen all year, potentially best offense we've seen, period. The way that they're able to get this done, and it's not just big plays, it's methodically moving the ball down the field and doing it not just with Tanner Nelms, or excuse me, with Taylor Elgersma, but with Tanner Nelms on the ground, because he finishes this game 23 attempts, 170 yards against a Western defense that, if nothing else, is stout in their rush defense. This was such an unbelievable showcase from the Laurier offense.
I, I was saying to you before the game, I was saying to you before we started recording, it would have been interesting to see the version of this game if it were a more, early November type of day, as opposed to feeling like a late August day, to see, okay, knowing how successful Western was early running the ball and how successful we know that they can be just pounding the rock. If it's a day where, throwing the ball becomes a slightly more treacherous, thing you're trying to do, how this game would have played out. At the end of the day, we still look at the day where Laurier goes a yard shy of 600 yards. We talked about Taylor's day. We'll talk more about it. But yeah, Tanner still gets 170 yards on the ground on 23 attempts and the touchdown. It was such a domination by Laurier. And much like we used to use as one of our catchphrases at Guelph and talking about our O-line, it starts with us. And by us, I mean them. And by them, I mean that Laurier O-line, and frankly, that D-line as well, because that first drive for Western, outstanding. And on the day, Yazbek ends with 124 yards. Obviously, 62 of those coming on his first touchdown run. Keon Edwards adds in 62 yards of his own. Certainly not a meager effort on the ground by them. But when you look at what Laurier was able to do in protecting Elgersma, in moving bodies for Nelms to be able to pick up all those yards, and then the ability of guys like La Quintana and Tenney getting 2 sacks apiece, Jahari Hastings adding in the half sack. We don't see that against Western often. And we've talked about that Evan's able to pick up some yards here and there on his feet. He was getting chased down left, right, and center. As we know, and as everyone knows, whether they want to admit it or not, football games are won in the trenches. And as good as that Western O-line and D-line was and is, that Laurier team out-dueled them on both sides of the ball in this game.
When you look at, you and I came in this saying, we think the Guelph Griffins are the best offensive line in the OUA, potentially in the country here. And then Western was able to do their thing, getting, I believe it was 6.5 sacks or 6 sacks
Yeah.
against them. I might be a little off on that, but I believe it was something along those lines. And while certainly that's not all on the O line, certainly there's a couple of mistakes here or there that were made by other teams, or it was great screams or whatever the case. You and I are looking at each other going, this Laurier offensive line is legit. And not only that, but to mention in the third quarter, I believe, Josh Reitveld, their, I believe, field side guard, goes down with an injury, and Tyler Potvin comes in, and you go, oh, wow, that's a massive loss and everything. And then they run the ball behind Tyler Potvin pretty much the rest of the game, albeit sure it was power game. So you got, I believe it was Josh Lambert who's coming over to kick out the end, and you're running behind Tyler Potvin and Cooper Hamilton. And anytime you're running behind Cooper Hamilton, you're going to have a good time. But the idea of it's just next man up mentality, and the guys who are waiting to come up in both Tyler Potvin and Ryan Hughes's case are ready to go. It's not like it's some scrub that's just off the bench here. These guys are trained, they're ready to go. They probably could be real legitimate players on any other team that they're in, but they're showcasing how well they're able to get things done and how dominant that Laurier offensive line was. You mentioned it earlier. I just can't get over what they were able to do here. Now, obviously, shout out to Soren Hallschmidt. He had a great game, including that interception, the lone interception that Taylor Elgersma threw by just tipping it up to himself and grabbing it and leading to a Western Mustang touchdown.
Shades of Mike Koshik.
Yeah, anytime a defensive lineman gets an interception in a Yates Cup, I think that just sends PTSD through your head of what Mr. Koshik did in our game. But just an outstanding showcase by this Laurier offensive line. I mean, breaking news, Cooper Hamilton is good at football, sure, but the domination that we were able to see in the establishing the run. Obviously, Tanner Nelms can take on a couple of defenders, no problem. We've seen that time and time again. But getting 170 on the ground against Western just does not happen. This was such a great showcase.
It really was. And yeah, hey, Zach Scotto, here you go. Your line's the best. The proof of the pudding is in the tasting. And my goodness, were they doing a hell of a job on that day. Coach Zach Scotto coaching up that O-line. And to your point about both guys like Potvin and Hughes being able to come into the game as guys riding pine for this club, speaks to, again, why we're having we're going to have the conversation when we dive into some of the history books of why this Laurier team might be one of the best that we've ever seen, at least in recent memory, when you're able to add that in. And as I said to you, Coach, we're evolving him from Stones to now Coach Todd Boulders Galloway. Part of the reason why you're going to hear us have some fun talking about some of your guys, some fake OUA trades, because how do you need all those guys? How do you even use all those guys in your offense? It's mind blowing. And part of the thing I loved in this game is that on the one hand, it was a very, I mean, again, just by the numbers, Taylor goes 18 for 30, 306 in the air, 4 touchdowns, the 1 interception. Yes, being the bad ball by Hallschmidt. Awesome job by him. Deserving of that all-star bid, pulls the ball down. But a picture-perfect day for Elgersma on a picture-perfect day, and he's connecting with his guys. Obviously, Hughes, as you mentioned, Oja Talayo getting 3 receptions on there. Ethan Jordan, only the 2 receptions, the 1 touchdown, and 1 in the scoreboard side end zone where he just missed Ethan Jordan, and you could tell he knew it right away. So he could have easily had that additional touchdown, that additional one for himself and for Jordan. But seeing some of the creativity as well, where we're seeing, being able to use a guy like Tayshaun Jackson, where you recognize, all right, hey, look, this guy is so explosive with the ball in his hands. We know that when he's out there returning kicks, regardless if teams want to kick to him or not. So how do we say, okay, we're going to force you to have to try and catch Tayshaun Jackson. You wheel him out of the backfield onto that route where he gets lost in the sauce in the defense, a defense that, again, like going back to the point of saying that this wasn't me or anyone who thought Western was winning this game sleeping on Laurier by any means. They dissected that defense, and then to be able to, and we don't know the status of Darian Bassett-Caden. He was taken off sometime in the second half. The ambulance had to come out to get him. He gave the thumbs up, but for your bruising back, So it's like you have Tayshaun Jackson as the lightning quick guy. You have Tanner Nelms as that downhill back, but then you go one level further as far as your bruisers to get to Bassick Hayden, not as your fullback, still a running back, a true running back, but who's an absolute boulder. To have him get a receiving touchdown and then have him throw a touchdown. The creativity is endless. Again, I have all the love and respect for Coach Galloway, being my former OC at Guelph. Love playing for him, and it's just so impressive seeing what he's able to put together. It's like watching a maestro just be able to work the orchestra and just have everything work so perfectly in concert. And when you add in the fact that those players, in whichever metaphor, whether it's the football version or the music analogy of it, are some of the best in the world, again, that's how you get us in a situation where we're saying this might be one of the best teams we've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I do want to say into this, and that you and I are obviously very high on Laurier and very, very excited about them. They need to win a championship, the national championship, to really be within that greatest teams of all time. I'm getting super excited, and certainly everything that is going on here, you and I are as well. But let's not forget, they still got two more games before they can really call themselves national champions. The one thing that 2011 team and that 2017 team have in common is those Vanier Cup championships. I think we got to pump the brakes a little bit here. We're getting a little overexcited.
Oh God, folks, this is Tom just trying to whatever he can protect the honor of his 2011 Mac Marauders and that team that, yeah, you won the Vanier. And what's great about all these clubs is that you guys beat Laval. That 17 Western team beat
Mhm.
Laval. And if things play out the way that we're thinking they could be, it would be Laurier having to do it. You know what? I like what you're doing there, Tom. I like what you're doing. You're like, well, only a true top team of all time. You have to win a Vanier Cup. We'll dissect that. Perhaps there's other ways to that route. But again, it makes all the sense in the world to say that that would have to be part of the product there. Let's talk about this Laurier defense.
Mhm.
And on our preview pod that we did going into the Yates, not the game day live, but the proper preview, we had a lot of folks in the comments addressing some of the all stars that weren't, pardon me, on that Laurier side of the ball. And obviously, we were talking a whole lot about the lack of Malik Cote on that list. A lot of people were pointing to the lack of Jesse Wilkins on that list. But however you want to slice it, the way that they were able to limit Western, the joke has always been you play Western on either side of the ball, you know what they're going to run, but they run it better than you can stop it. It doesn't matter. And we've been talking about this evolution of the offense. And when we had Trey Humes on the show beforehand, we talked about whether he's been seeing some of those things that we think we've been seeing of Coach Gaten Richard being a little more creative and using those tools to be able to get out of that more traditional, just downhill offense. Obviously, they started the game really going back to the well with just running it downhill, 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 and downhill, ending in that Yazbek touchdown. And obviously Trey alluded to the fact that when you have a guy like Evan who can make those decisions on the fly, you can open up the playbook. And he alluded to with Chris Merchant on those two Vanier Cup teams. Obviously, you can do that as well. This is a team, as we said, that started going really back to their basics of running that zone and power run game.
Mhm.
And it netted them that big touchdown. But we've seen that creativity all day long, all season long, I should say. It felt like Coach Van Moorkirk had their script on what they wanted to do, whether it was screen game to the receivers, whether it was some of the deep shots downfield, whether it was the short yardage game for Western, which has been seemingly unstoppable when big number 10 comes in Rancourt to run some of those looks in the short yardage or just when they're within the 10. Laurier didn't blink at any of that. They rallied to the ball. They limited the yak yards, albeit, of course, a couple of the splashy plays. That Brandon Masseri touchdown right in our corner of the end zone where we were back shoulder, fading backwards. Beautiful ball, beautiful catch. Aside from a few of those splash plays, Laurier had them clamped down at every level.
Yeah, I just quickly want to say once again, I cannot tell you folks how validating it feels, how good it feels when you say something and it comes out to be true. On the game day live, I specifically said watch out for Braden Masseri because he's going to do some special things. 5 catches, 97 yards, along a 70 and a touchdown that you just spoke about is so nice to see. And obviously, Seth Robertson getting also 97 yards, albeit on 4 catches as well, was awesome as well. But my goodness, when you talk about this Laurier defensive dominance, and it's not like numbers really jump off the page here. I mean, when you look at the defensive side of things for Western, Ryan Barthelson with 10 tackles, Jackson Findlay with 7.5 and a pass breakup, you're going, oh, wow. Like I mentioned, Leomi Ojutalayo led the defensive statistic category with 5.5. But to me, that really just showcases how much of a team defense that this was. Jaden Griffiths with 5.5, Tristan Miller, Malik Cote, and Chisenham Incidem with 5 tackles. We really wanted to highlight Chisenham as well because that was really where that domination started on that Laurier Golden Hog D line. Chisenham was a load. He's always been a load in the middle, but speaking to Jack Moore after the game and talking about some of those special players, he specifically mentioned Chisenham as last year weighed 340 pounds and is not a fat dude by any means, but wanted to focus on getting better himself. He drops 30 pounds to just a slim and sleek 310. But now you can suddenly see this where Evan Hillock, and we know how fast he is and how deceptively quick and agile he is. Chisenham is keeping up with him damn near step for step and runs him out of bounds twice in this game. This is a Laurier defense and a Laurier squad that is just getting better and better and better. And Ethan Gregorczyk is a big factor of that and how well he's been playing. 4.5 tackles on the day as well. Marcus Tierney and La Quintana. I mean, getting to Evan, that's what we've seen be the most successful. And I know, once again, a hot take. Oh, the way you should stop a great quarterback is by sacking him as often as you can. But in the teams and the ways that Western hasn't been able to really do their thing offensively, we saw that in 22 in the national semi with Laval. We saw that in last year in the national semi against Montreal. And we saw it in this game is constantly getting pressure in Evan's face and having to force him to get out of the pocket and try to find his guys down the field here. That's what this Laurier squad was really doing, and it started with the big boys up front. The thing that I wanted to highlight, we mentioned this as a breaking news on the Game Day Live, and I wanted to highlight here the return of Ethan Bayfield. He made a couple of fantastic plays and just kind of locking down receivers as well. And I think he's a massive addition to that defensive secondary for Laurier. I mean, when you've got Jahari Hastings, Ethan Bayfield, Harnur Dhaliwal, it's just unbelievable the amount of firepower that they have on the defensive side of the ball, which is insane because when you think Laurier football, you think Taylor Elgersma and the offense. But don't sleep on this Laurier defense. They're really able to do their thing, which I know, I get it, folks. 31 points, and we're talking about how good this defense is. I know how that sounds, but watch this game and you will see what we were talking about.
It really is. And again, by the numbers, you look at Evans Day, 18 for 29, 323 and 2 touchdowns. You look at Yazbek picking up 124 and Edwards with the 62. We talked about those touchdowns by Masseri and the other one being to Moss and Jamal. You know, by the numbers, it was a great day for them. But when you add it, I don't have the exact numbers, at least 2, maybe 3 third and short situations where Laurier shuts the door, one being deep in the red zone, one being around midfield, leading directly to some points. I think the third one was late in the game. It might have led to a field goal, but it might have been a moot point regardless. And you add in just the, like, again, a clean day for Western from the standpoint of they don't drop the ball. I mean, for both teams, again, aside from just a stellar play by Soren Hallschmidt, it's a really clean game by both teams. The penalties are super clean by both teams, only 2 for Western and the 1 for Laurier on that side. And it's like, so how do you account for it? And it's just in those key situations where Laurier needed the play to be able to put Western in a tough situation where now you're in a 2nd and long, or you're in that 3rd and short, and that's all year been money for Western. And they're saying, not today, my friends. And situations, again, where it wasn't always just Rancourt sneaking it. There was one where I think they shut the door on him, but a couple other times where they're still running read option plays. And from where we were standing, it's hard to tell just what happened on the read where he decides to keep it. And it's as if there's a 13th guy on the field for Laurier to still say, great, we're going to play the run and we're going to play the keep by Rancourt on that. They just had a response for everything. But one of the things that I think became so impressive for Laurier in this on this day is you mentioned it. Western goes up 7-0 and does it in a dominating fashion. And, yeah, again, just goes to what Coach Michael Faulds has established with this team of being like, cool, it's our time now, time to respond. And they absolutely did, leading to them going up 28-7 halfway through the second quarter. Everyone and their mother in the house thinking, wow, my goodness, this thing is a wrap. It's a blowout. It's a sure thing. You talk about that Hallschmidt interception leading to points. Then with Western being able to get the ball back one of their few times where they get Laurier to go 3-and-out on the first series of a drive, and they get the ball back, leading to Yazbek's second touchdown on the day. And before you know it, it's 28-21 going into halftime. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, and we're there with our guy and JT Sui, director of culture and sport for Football Ontario. What could you have picked? In the short list of people you'd want to be watching Yates Cup with, you being number one on that list. But I knew I was going to be with you. Didn't know we were going to have the pleasure and the honor of being with our guy and JT. We're saying, okay, Van Moorkirk, okay, Gleason, who's making more adjustments, who's doing this, that, and the third, and whatever it came down to in those locker rooms, Laurier just comes out. And they put up almost 20 unanswered points through the third quarter. And it becomes too tough to even surmount. So the fact that they responded both to the opening touchdown for Western without blinking, they respond to that comeback late in the second quarter going into the half, all the momentum seemingly being on Western's side, and they come out in the second half and just dominate. It just, again, goes to show those added aspects, and perhaps to the point that Coach Faulds on his social media point of like, correction, it's not coach of the year, it's staff of the year at all facets. And you love how many of the former Golden Hawks are on that staff who've been in these games, who can talk to these guys, walk them through, even having a guy like Willem Moa being on the special constable side. Like, it's such a family affair there at Laurier. But really just spectacular from not just the performance they did, but in recognizing that, yeah, you can look at the final score, much like you can from that earlier matchup, and say, wow, Laurier beat the hell out of Western. They did, but Western gave them a good fight. Again, that's just why Laurier is just that much more impressive. And that's all my focus is following this game. It's not about Western being frauds or anything like that. That's a silly take to be able to have. Laurier is a special team that we see come around, I guess, by somewhat of the math of what we're talking about, maybe once every 5 years in the OUA.
One of the stats to really showcase how impressive a Western victory is that I love, that we just recently found out: the last time that a home team hoisted and won the Yates Cup that wasn't Western was my McMaster Marauders back in 2014, 10 years ago. Every other Yates Cup except for one, even if Western hasn't won it, it's been in London. Obviously, your year when you beat them in 2015, 2016, the Laurier team, 17 and 18, 19. The only other year is 21 where they played against Queens in that COVID year in Kingston. And we all remember how that ended up going. But it's such a dominating fashion, which once again, why I will harp on this. Greg Marshall, if there's ever going to be a coach who deserves a statue outside of a stadium, it is Coach Marshall for the domination that he's brought to the Western Mustangs. But it's why you and I are so high on this Laurier squad, because if you're actually able to do it and put up 51 points against a Western Mustang defense, and in Paul Gleason, Coach Paul Gleason, put some respect on that name again, so my bad on my part. There's a reason why we are so high on this Western Mustang squad. There's a reason why we're so high on this Laurier squad, because beating a Western Mustang team does not happen very often, especially in the OUA. And to see this dominating fashion has been nothing short of amazing. and really showcasing it from top to bottom, from not only just offense and defense, but on the special team side of things as well. This was just a top to bottom showcase of what this Laurier squad is able to do. And once again, when you talk about great coaches, you talk about what a head coach does to a team. You obviously having that experience with Coach Stu Lang, and I myself with Coach Stefan Potasic, establishing what a winning culture looks like, establishing what it means to be a Griffin, to be a Marauder, and to be at the very top of the OUA in those cases. And that's exactly what Coach Michael Falls has been doing here. I have nothing but incredible things to say about that man because of how well he has established and put together this squad. When you look at the resume from both Todd Galloway and Ron Van Worker, either of them have the resumes to be head coaches. They could have been head coaches 10 years ago with all of these stuff that they were able to do here. And then you've got something like Coach Robichaux leading your special teams. You've got Coach Mike Daly, one of the best defensive backs to come out of the McMaster Marauders and a seasoned CFL veteran with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. You've got Josh Vanderweerd, another guy from my McMaster team who was a Yates Cup champion as your strength and conditioning coach. Trayvon James. You've got all of these unbelievable coaches with what they've done both as players, and they are now imparting that on this team here, and you can see the production. You can see how well these players are just buying into this culture. And you can see how it starts with the captain on that team, with people who look at in Taylor Elgersma. I had a chance to interview him as one of the guys that we interviewed after the game, like you mentioned, and he's using it almost as a plug for why you should come to Laurier, because he just believes in the culture, believes in Coach Faulds, and it's something that's infectious when you talk to people around the program and you talk about how much Coach Faulds means to them. It's this reverence that's here that's only surrounded by great coaches. And I know I'm gushing right now, but when you really speak to the folks at Laurier and you talk about what does Coach Faulds mean to you, you'll hear just the same amount of gushing as I just did there. This is a special staff, and there's no question as to why this is such a special team.
Yeah, it really is, and the ability for them to, again, their journey's not done, and they'll be the
No.
first ones to tell you. Everyone we were talking to was saying, "Hey, 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks," and the fact that despite that, to look past that a little bit, they could possibly return so many of these guys is redonkulous. You mentioned the piece on Western not for a Yates Cup to be won not in London, whether it's by Western or another team. You go back to that 2014 year and allow me to just say, this Laurier team will probably end up higher in the rankings of all-time teams than any Griffin team I wound up on. But and Todd Galloway was the one to point this out to me when we were talking to him after the game. What our Griffins can hold over this Laurier team is that when we played Western twice, we picked up 2 wins and we scored over 100 points in those 2 wins. They came a few points short of that endeavor. Funny story for Coach Galloway to share that with his guys, and they were, I think, giving him a bit of grief for not getting the job done. But what a job that was done by that Laurier Golden Hawk team. And again, to no shot at Western on the day. And we've been talking about the chip that they've been coming into these seasons with. My goodness, that's a team that's, I'm certain we'll do our offseason exit meeting with all the teams. Western, of course, being one that I'm as excited to talk about as any other. An offensive line that might get a little bit better next year with guys like Sebastian Siobald and Keegan O'Neill perhaps returning to that side of the ball. But nonetheless, Laurier, what a season as far as the OUA schedule goes. You ran the table and you did so in style and with grit, which is such a cool combination to be able to bring to the table. Their journey does not end there as they head out to Lennoxville to take on the Bishop's Gators in the national semifinals. Tom, man, oh man, what a journey it's been through getting through this OUA season. The Yates Cup lived up to everything we wanted and then some, coming off the back of such a parody riddled OUA season 1 through 11, showing us things all season long that had us on the edge of our seats, touting week after week just why this is the best conference in all of U Sports football. Final thoughts on the Yates, and then I'll get your final thoughts on everything we got to see on this conference championship weekend in U Sport football.
The one thing that I really wanted to call out with the Yates Cup, you and I had been to a couple of Laurier home games. That Yates Cup crowd
Oh, yes.
was the best Laurier crowd that we have seen. They were loud, they were passionate, and they were locked in the game throughout the entirety of the game. At one point in time, even pushing over the stanchions on that Darian Hayden touchdown pass, pushing things over and celebrating, throwing beer into the onto the field, which we are not condoning. Do not do that, folks. You are going to ruin it for everybody else.
Yes.
But my goodness, it was so great to be in at Laurier. And at certain times, you know, I don't necessarily really want to take a big shot at the Laurier faithful, but maybe a little bit of a one. You and I are at the Laurier Guelph game, and those Guelph fans were definitely louder than the Laurier fans that were there. We watched the semifinal game between Laurier and Queens, and those Queens fans traveled pretty well. This was a dominating showcase from the fan standpoint as well, getting people involved in the game and getting them loud and really getting them a part of it. I don't think people truly understand as a fan how much you can influence the game when you are engaged, when you are yelling and screaming at the right points here. You can completely throw off the chemistry of an opposing offense so easily. And I wish that more people understood that, because when you show up to games and you are loud, it creates such an incredible environment for the players who are on the field, but also you help out your home team like freaking crazy when you do that. So wanted to shout out the fans that were there. The beer garden obviously was jam-packed with people, and that was the loudest part. You and I were pretty close to them, along with our guy and JT Suey there as well. But what a great atmosphere. Now the folks, the Laurier Golden Hawks, know why you and I love that Yates Cup so much. It feels like solid oak. It does have a hollow on the inside, but it's oak wood on the outside. It's a heavy trophy, but the beer you drink out of it is so sweet. It's like the nectar of the gods. And congratulations, Laurier. You get a chance to hoist it for the first time since 2005.
2016.
2006, 2005 at home.
At home. There you go. There you go. Yeah, no, a great job bringing up the fans. And you know what? The renovations to University Stadium are still ongoing. It was 5,000 and change, which we've talked about in referencing the experience I got playing at Montreal, where they can make the 6,000 sound like 16,000. Certainly felt like that. The fact that there's no track really has the crowd feeling like they're on top of you there. But no doubt with those further renovations that they're going to do, being able to pack it with that many more folks, the fact that it's right in that neighborhood, just part and parcel with Laurier being such a small campus. It's again, it's fun to root for them. It's fun when they have that success as they have had this year, and will hope to continue doing into the U Sports semifinals. Tom, your final thoughts on those other conference championships that are setting up our Mitchell and UTEC Bowl this year?
In the other three winners of their conference championships, we saw outstanding defenses, and we really saw great showcases from them in terms of why they were able to get over the hump in the teams that they played against. Laurier was the best offensive showcase in those games here. And while, yes, once again, I've mentioned this 3 times now, 31 points, how can you call that a defensive showcase? It was, when you know what the Western Mustangs are capable of doing to any opposing team at any given point here. Laurier is, for anybody who's watching all of these games, and I've done my best to watch as many games across the country as I possibly can because I'm a lunatic and I love Canadian university football. Laurier is the favorite to win the Vanier Cup 100%, with how well that defense is playing and how unstoppable at times that offense seems to be. The thing that I love about them, and you already mentioned this, we had We're on the field. We're watching them hoist the Yates Cup and we're watching them celebrate. They've just put their medals over their neck and we're talking to them, hey, congratulations. And every one of them, yeah, this is great. We got two more though. We got two. And I'm like, guys, I understand the mentality. It's been 30 minutes since the game ended. Just like soak this in just a little bit. No. We got 2 games to go. We'll party tonight. We'll enjoy ourselves tonight, but we got 2 games to go. The mentality is there. Coach Faulds has them locked in. If you haven't been watching previously, you've got to watch the Laurier Golden Hawks because I truly think you're going to see history in motion with how well this team is playing.
While you were interviewing Elgersma, I was standing with Harnour and Jack Moore, and Harnour's completely locked in, and I can't wait for that interview to come out that you did with him. But for all those guys on that team, perhaps no one more am I happier for than Harnour, knowing what he's had to deal with in having the knee surgery, coming from Ottawa, transferring in, fitting in seamlessly, hurting his hammy, and then getting to raise that trophy. But he's doing the exact thing you were talking about. And Jack's just like, I get you, man. But these don't come around that often. Enjoy it, man. And I'm certain he did, along with his teammates there for the Laurier Golden Hawks. Tom, outstanding job by you as always. Outstanding job on the Game Day Live. Again, shout out to our guys from Royal Media and Manny and Alex helping us provide you with that pregame show. Our best numbers by a long shot that we've been able to do. Small sample size, obviously, having only done the 4, and it makes all the sense in the world that there were more eyes tuning in for the Yates and for the preview show. Shout out to Jack Moore on the broadcast as well. Shout out to all the folks. He's with Marsh up there in the booth and everyone who put on such a great showing there across USports as well. Our guy out in Bishops. We're going to find out who you are. We're going to have you on the podcast. You better be as electric as you were on that broadcast because we've been doing nothing but talking you up. What a great weekend of USport football. We are now down to 4 teams vying for the Vanier Cup. We have Bishops hosting Laurier and Regina hosting Laval. We will set up those games and talk about much, much more later this week, right here at the 55.